ይብላሎ አንበሳ ይጓዝማሎ ይብላሎ አንበሳ ይጓዝማሎ ምድረ ፈርሳ ሃበልማሎ ማናንዝና ሁሉ አሎ
ሰላም ተኸታተልቲ ናይ ዝመደብ ድምፂ ይስማዕ እንድሕር ኣሎ ኮይኑ ሓደ ግበሩ ኣዝዩ ኣገዳሲ ድበሃል ከም ወትሩ ቶፒክ ሒዝናልኩም መፂና ኣለና ምሳኹም ክንፀኒሕና ንሕፅር ዝበለ ላይፍ ሎማዓንቲ ንሪኦ ሕጂ ዝበፅሓና ኣዝዩ ዘሐጉስ ዜና ኣሎ እቲ ሓደ ዜና ከይዘርጋሕናዮ ሕጂ ቅድሚ ገለ ደቃይቕ ኣቢሉ ካልእ ዜና መፂና ኣሎ ዘሐጉስ ዜና ክንነግረኩም ኢና እሱ እንታይ ምዃኑ ኣብቲ ዝዓበየ ድማ ኣገዳሲ ዝበሃል ቪድዮ መሃሪ ቪድዮ ሒዘልኩም መፅእ ኣለኹ ዓለምና ዘይትሪኦ ዘላ ህልም ዝበለ ኩናት ኩልና ዝተፀምብርናያ ኩናት ኣሎ ከይተረዳኣና እንታይ እዩ ንሱ ብሓንሳብ ክንርኢ ከድሊ እዩ ስጋብ እዚኣ ሙዚቃ ትውድእ ፕሊዝ ተኽኢልኩም ላይክ ግበሩ ክመፀኩም እየ ተመሊሰ
ይብላሎ አንበሳ ይጓዝማሎ ይብላሎ አንበሳ ይጓዝማሎ ምድረ ፈርሳ ሃበልማሎ ማናንዝና ሁሉ አሎ
ሰላም ደጊምና ሰላም ንብለኩም ተኸታተልቲ ናይዚ ሜድያ ናጋጣሚ ሎማዓንቲ ኣዝዩ ጽቡቕ ዜና ኣዳሊና እንዳበልና ደጊሞም ሓደ ካልእ ዜና ቅድሚ ናብ ስቱድዮ ምእታውና ዝሰዲዶምልና ኣለው ኩልና ብሓንሳብ ክንሪኦን ክንሕጎስን ኣገዳሲ እዩ ብመሰረት ናቕፋ ፕረስ ዝፀሓፎ ወይ ከዓ ተስፋ ኒውስ ኣብ ትዊተር ቅድሚ ምእታውና ዝረኸብናዮ ሰከንድ ጎልድ ሜዳል ፎር ኤሪትሪያ ካልኣይ ማለት እዩ ሕጂ ናቕፋ ፕረስ ዝፀሓፎ እንታይ ድብልሎ ሎሚ 24/11/2023 ኣብ ዝተኻየደ ውድድር ምሕምባስ ኤርትራዊት ክርስቲና ሪቺ ኣብ መበል 101 ዝተኻየደ ግጥም 100 ሜትሮ ነፃ ምሕምባስ ፍሪስታይል ብዘደንቕ ፍጥነት ናይ ኬንያ ብልፅቲ ሓምባሲት ብምቕዳም ብ1.0151 ካልኢት ቀዳመይቲ ብምዃን ዳግማይ ወርቂ ዓቲራ ስዒባ ዝተዓወተት ኬንያዊት ካፋኒ ድዊኒ ብ1.0157 ካልኢት ብሩር መዳልያ ኣልዒላ ብተመሳሳሊ ዜና ኤርትራዊት ኣትሌት ሄርሜላ ንጉሰ ኣብ ናይ 50 ሜትሮ ውድድር ጽምብላሊዕ ባተርፍላይ ዩጋንዳውያን ተወዳደርቲ ተኸቲላ ብ42 52 ሰከንድን ካልኣይቲ ካልኢትን ሶሪ ሳልሰይቲ ብምዃን ነሓስ ብምእታው نحس مدالية على العلالة ودر شامبيونز أفريقيا صباح أبزكاير ودر كزازميو بوق عدل منشي عبد الواسع إبراهيم وانا صحافي هاجراو فدريشن من محضر جلابون إيرترا أزي تي جود نيوزيو كنا عطوينا مهنياتو جود نيوز كسمع يقبأ نايو we deserve it كنا عطوينا نابتي لو ما أنتي لحزنايو أقداسي زبهال توبيكات هالنا كمتي ووترو نقبرو زلنا مشت مسانا صنحو انت خيلكم اتيا لايك متوا اي ترسعو مو نقطاو نابتي لو ما انتي انتاي زلوتي توبيكات زارب كنرينا مجمرتا انسبيريشن حدا اب تويتر ببزح غزي نريو غن شلل دبلنايو نا حدا تصليم افريقاوي اب تمرتي زحلفو مكرا كنري كدليو مخنياتو زي نوزحات ن انسبيريشن كويننايو حجي ازي شمو جورج ماكلارين إذا كم تري وده لهم قفعي أرت علمت زنبرة بأمريكاوين ويكاب تعبدو نعهم إيرتراوين بتاريخ دركوب كملوا تهلوا تغنوا وتسمعوا وتغنوا جن كما نبين في اليوم أب كلاس يبلوا خمس نبرون تمام هران كي تعرفوا attention فتيمم هبوا خمس نبرون زقني يكون حتى ولا حتى كم ذي في كورو زنبرن يو أب تاريخ ناتو زقلس حجزيش حنش عتب 40 شو مونتني أنا زارب زلنا جن ببقرب دحرس بزح زتجبر ريفورمز سو أما حيشمو بزحت سلمتنا بينفسات كأتو تفقيل لهم بزحك آلسي حالي فيه حجنت أيكم لكم من متى أمتيزي إن حري لكم أفريقيا لك تقلي لا عدلا إذا تسألي مزتري ولا لهم لك خم أفريقيا غيركم حسبوا أبزق زينا أفريقيا تقلي لا عدلا خابتي مارجنالايز كوينا كابتي ناي ستيجنا عالم بتزلوا هابتي بتزلوا سوسانس جوديشن برسنت نتقوم لا خبقعوا نعاجن يقللوا يمزلوا حجي من يمكن أبو لا زقبهم نحنان دقنا كتابو خلو لهم تطابيقو نحنا مسلنا ازيو افريقيا ازي فالينا افريقيا كبلو خلو لهم بزد ما نفس على درجه حاف كنبلاينا اتي كوينات ورا كوينات زبحال كابت زوبانا كتفق خلال لو سب بكعشو بقلا سعيرو دبل زمن كمصنا خلال لو غانتا ناي كمزي سعيرا دبللو اكند خمص زغبو بكوينات كمزي كند سب مويتو دبحال اسو كترف خلال لو Anyway, the history natu, he is George McLaurin, the first black man admitted on Oklahoma University in 1948. He was forced to sit in a corner away from his fellow white men. Haji Shumu George McLaurin is bahal nemejammerta tsallim tamaharay abta Oklahoma University bahal bshin chaat 140 شو مونتن ينيرو سلازي كم تري ود لهم دبينو كوفي بلونيرو اب دحريت اب غوني معناتيو حجيت هيدلو but his name remains on the honor list as one of the top 3 students in the college حدا خابتهم زلع على نتبي زنورهم ناي هونري تبهال باس زلع على نتبي زمصالو لي خابتا كوليج كمان خابتهم سلسته تمهارو تبهال خابتا كوليج يوتيو سلازي ازي يسو these are his words. Some colleagues looked at me like I was an animal. قال لي ممهرتي animal كم انسسا غيرهم يمزقطرن نيرهم كم زي انسسا يمزمسلون نيرهم. No one spoke to me. زخون يهون سب مساك الزارب يدلي نبرن. For teachers I didn't even exist. لتو ممهران مخ أقدفوهم. فتيما درجة أين بركون. إذا بلزلوا حجي أتي sad story ينانر يدلنا ساتهم دحلفوه تاريخ. زي مسألمتي دحلفوه. نحناون بجزاتي بزح حليفنا إنا بوتاتنا حليفهم مؤيم ولدنا حليفهم مؤيم ستيل أفريقيا هم يحلف هالو أتي نعقات نسارسي وورلد ويسارسي عالم من داولو زنعق ودلو كابيز متأشيميو نحريكم كابز استوها بالناشيميو حجي أتي resources دلو ناي أفريقيا كمزموزقن they are more than happy ترى ديكونا قبل عليها الجدا ينبرون تدعى كتحلفهم دليها no أيكونني أنا بناتي خيدي أنت أخذ بالفتين كاملتي. Okay, let's move on. ناي كبابينا زلو أب كل الأمحران تاي تجبر زلو حدا point تنكف قبل لكم. According ناي Eritrean press out was never. According to report, Ethiopia's ruling party plans to divide Amhara into 4 regions as Fano controls 60% of the region. بمسرت ناي PP ويكا منجستي ناي أبي نتا كل الأمحرة بأربعة خمقلوا مدبات كم زلوهم يزاربوا له مغنياتو تفانو بحال 6% نايتي ريجن كل الأمحرة تقطعيرو سلازلو بخمين أما حضرو أبزبل يمزكاتو عزلو حدا فيديو شير تبع نيرو ናይዞም ትሪኦ ዘለኹም ስእሊ ወዲ ኣብ ዩቲዩብ ሎማዓንቲ ከማን ሰሚዐዮም ነይረ እቲ ዘለዎም ፕላን እቲ ክልል ኣምሓራ ክንቆፃፅሮ ስለ ዘይንኽእል ንፋኖ ከዓ እንዳደፍአና ስለ ዝኸይድ ዘሎ ነታ ክልል ኣምሓራ ኣብ 5 ምቀላ ወይ በቲ ናይ ቀደም ዘመን ትግዝኦ ዝነበረት ብከምኡ ገዛዚእና ነዳኽሞ ንፋኖ ዝብል እዩ ሓሳብ ነይርዎም እሱ ጥራይ ከይኣክል the ruling party also assesses that if a war ignites with Eritrea it is more likely that Amhara will join Eritrean forces ሕጂ እንታይ ድብል ዘሎ እቲ ruling party ማለት ናይ ፓርቲ ናይ ኣሕመድ ዓሊ መን ሽሙ ትጥፋእ በዓል ፈልጥ ናይ ዶክተር አብይ እንታይ ድብል ዘሎ እንተዳ ኩናት ተወሊዑ ምስ ኤርትራ እቶ ኣምሓራ ዝበሃል ምስ ኤርትራ ክጽጋዕ ከም ዝኽእል ንዓና ክትቃዓና ይኽእል እዩ ዝብል ፍርሒ ኣለዎም እዩ ዝብል ዘሎ እዚ ኣብ ማሕበራዊ ሚድያታት እንታይ ይበሃል ከም ዘሎ ክነገረኩም ስለ ዝደለና ኢና ብዛዕባ ሓደ እቲ ትማሊ ዝተዘርግሐ ናይ ሩስያ ድምልከት ተስፋኒውስ ዝፀሓፎ ነይሩ እዚ ሕጂ the establishment of Russian military presence in Eritrea is seen as mutual beneficial for both nations and if it happens the preferred site for establishing the bases is Asab ሕጂ እቲ Russian military presence ኣብ ኤርትራ ክገብር ይሓስብ ኣሎ ኮይኑ ወይ ወዲእዎ እንድሕር ኣሎ ኮይኑ እታ best places preferred ወይ ከዓ ክመርፅዋ ዝኽእሉ ንሳቶም ዓሰብ እያ ይድብል ዘሎ ከም ስርዓት ሓደ ዌብሳይት ናቱ ጽሒፉ ነይሩ ሎማዓንቲ ብዙሕ እዩ ጽሒፉ ዝነበረ ግን እቲ ጽሑፍ ኣብ assumption ዝተመስረተ እዩ assumption ማለት ከምዚ ተኾነኸ ዝብል ዘረባታት ስለ ዝኾነ ካብዚ ኣቐዲምና ቅድሚ 2-3 መዓልቲ ትማሉ ናቢልና ዝነገርናኩም ካብኡ ሓሊፉ ዝወፀ ጸብጻብ የብሉን እንታይ እዩ ዝፅብፅብ ዘሎ ንሱ ከምዚ ዶ ፖርት ነይሩና ኣብዚ ነይሩ ኢንሻአላህ ብዙሕ ነገራት ኣሎ Eritrea has 3 primary areas of interest to Russian naval planners the port of Massawa and Asab and offshore Dahlak archipelagos ስለዚህ ኣብዘን ሰለስቲአን ኣብ ዳህላክ ኣብ ዓሰብ ኣብ ባፅዕ ክትህባ ተኽእሎታት ኣሎ እዩ ዝብል ዘሎ ንሱ ከም ፖይንት ስለ ዝፀሓፍዎ ጥራይ ተንኪፈ የደለኹ ግን ንዓና ሕማቕ ኣይኮነን ምክንያቱ ዲስካስ ክንገብረሉ ክንሪኦን ኣገዳሲ ስለ ዝኾነ ኣብቲ ናይ ኣፍሪቃ ጉዳይ ንርኣይ ብመሰረት ኣብ ትዊተር ዘውር ዘሎ ሓደ ኣፍሪቃን ሃብ ዝበሃል Mali and Russia has signed a deal to build a gold refinery in the capital city of Mali, Bamako. Mali ምስ ሩስያ ሓደ ናይ ጎልድ ሪፋይነሪ ወይ መጻረይ ኣብታ ከተማ ባማኮ ክምስረት ወይ ከዓ ክድኮን ተሰማሚዐን ከም ዘለዋ ይነገር ኣሎ The deal involves building a refinery to process 200 tons of gold annually. ስለዚህ ተሰማሚዕ እንታይ እዩ 200 ቶን ዝኾን ጎልድ ዓመታዊ ኣብቲ ቦታ ክጻረይ ዝብል ስምምዓት ከም ዘለው እዩ እቲ ዝኸይድ ዘሎ The project will allow Mali to control all gold production in the country and correctly apply all taxes and duties. ስለዚህ እቲ ፕሮጀክት ወይ ከዓ እቲ ፕላን ተሓሲቡ ዘሎ ንማሊ እቲ ጎልድ እቲ ተሓስቡ ዘላ ፕላን ብምልዓ ባዕላ ኮንትሮል ክትገብሮ ከም እትደሊ እዩ እቲ ደውጥዎ ዘሎ ፕሮፖዛል ወዲ ኣፈወርቂ እዚኣ ዝዝክርዎ ይኹን ብምልኡ እቲ ዝኣቱ ናብዚ ሃገር ድወፅእን ዘበለ ድሕሪ ሕጂ ባዓልና ኢና ፕሮሰስ ክንገብሮ እንደሊ እዩ ዝበሃል ዘሎ ኦኬ እዚኣ ናይ ክሳይ ተገሊፃ እያ ወንደርፉል እዚኣ ተገሊፃ እያ ካልእ ናብ ዞባና ክንከይዲና ኣብ መንጎ እዚኣ ሸር ዝተባሃለት ኣላ ንዓ ትምልከት ሓንቲ ፅሕፍትላ እንታይ ትብል ዘላ ናሽናል ኢአር ኢንትረስት ክሬዲት ክህቦም ከም ወትሩ ብጣዕሚ ንፉዓት ፀሓፍቲኦም እንታይ ትብል ሱዳን ኣዛዚ ዳዕመል الثوري ሌተናል ጀነራል መሐመድ ሐምዳን ደገሎ ሕመቲ بتمثالي عزازي سراوي السودان جنرال عبد الفرحان البرهان مس بريزيدنت كينيا ويليام روتو لومي 24 حدار كل تشحن 23 تراهبو لمسرح سلام جدة زلو دقف دما قليسو كوينات حد السودان نمفتاح بزوح تبقوسات كوسات أنيهيو أزي بنقسنا السعود عرب أمريكا أفريقيا كمون إيجاد دقف اللو استبع لمسرح سلام جدان بقرب تهاجرات استبقى مسرح سلام كايرون دما بقدام النت زدقسو يوم سعود عرب نتي بقرب تهاجرات استوست تبقسو عيد قفتون ጌጋም ባሩ ድማ ኣብቲ ፕሬዝደንት ኢሳያስ ኣፈወርቂ ምስ ኣገልግሎት ዜና ኤሪ ቲቪ ብቋንቋ ዓረብ ዘካየዱ ኣለምሕተት ኣነፂሩ ነይሩ እዩ ዳዕመል ኣልሰውሪ ብሕቡራት ኢማራት ዓረብ ዝድገፍ ዘሎ ሓይሊ እዩ ኣብዚ ቀረባ እዋን ጥራይ ብርክት ዝበለ ዕጥቅን ሎጂስቲክን ካብ ኢማራት ብመገዲ ቻድ ከም ዝተራገፈ ይእመን ብተመሳሳሊ ኬንያ ምንቅስቃስ ኢማራት ተጻሪራ ጂኦፖለቲካዊ ረብሓ ኮይኑ ረኺባቶ እያ እዚ ድማ በቲ ኢማራታዊ ኩባንያ ንወደብ ሞምባሳ ንምርማስ ዓሊሙ ምስ ታንዛንያ ዝገብሮ ዘሎ ግዙፍ ስምምዓት ከም ኣብነት ክግለጽ ይኽእል እዩ ስለዝኾነ ርግኣት ቀርኒ ኣፍሪቃ ንኬንያ ከገድሳ እዩ እዚ ተበግሶታት ናይ ስዑዲ ይኹን ጎረባብቲ ሃገራት ካይሮ ብኸመይ መገዲ ንኽልቲኦም ተጻረርቲ ሓይልታት ሚዛናዊ ውግንና ይህልዎ ካብቲ ክምልሶ ዘለዎ ሕቶ እዩ ስለዝኾነ እዩ እውን ዳዕመል ኣልሰውሪ ልኡም ተገዳስነት ከርኢ ዝጸንሐ ዝብል መረዳእታ ኣሎ ንኢማራት ዘጠቓለለ ርክባት ኣብ ዞባታት ቀርንን ቀይሕ ባሕርን ከምፅእ ዝኽእል ፍታሕ እውን ርጡብ ኣይኮነን ኢማራት ዳርጋ ብቑሉዕ ክትብሎ ትኽእል ኣብ ምፍብራኽ ግርጭታት ኣድሂባ እያ ትሰርሕ ዘሎ እዚ ድማ ንውሱን ጂኦፖለቲካዊ ረብሓታታ ዝዓለመ እዩ መስርሕ ሰላም ጄዳ ንኣሜሪካ ዝተሓንገጠ ተበግሶ ምዃኑ እውን ንገዛእ ርእሱ ኣጸጋሚ ይገብሮ ኣሜሪካ ብኹልንትና ኣብ ዞባና ዘለዋ ጥሙሕ ድልየታት ካብቲ ናይ ኢማራት ዝገዘፈ እዩ ስለዚ ቅርዑይ ክኸውን ይኽእል እዩ ኢልካ ከተመዛዝን ኣጸጋሚ እዚ ግን ምናልባት ስዑድ ዓረብ ንኣሜሪካ ከምቲ ናይ እስራኤል ፍልስጥኤም ብውዕል ኦስሎ ኣክውድ 1993 ዝፍለጥ ስማዊ ናይ ሽምግልና ቦታ ክትህባ ተፃዊታ እንተወፂኣቶ እቲ ውፅኢት ክቕየር ይኽእል እዩ እቲ ዝበለፀን ዘይሻራውን ኮይኑ ኣብዚ ጉዳይ ሱዳንን ውፅኢት ከምፅእ ዝኽእል ዝነበረ እዚ ናይ ጎረባብቲ ሃገራት ተበግሶ ካይሮ እዩ ነይሩ ከም መንግስቲ ኤርትራ ኣብ ሱዳን ዘሎ ቁልውላ ንምፍታሕ ናብ በሪ ኣማን ንምብፃሕን ሓደ ሰነድ ኣዳልዩ ኣብቲ ዋዕላ ካይሮ ኣቕሪቦ ነይሩ እዩ እዚ ውጥን ናይ ጄዳ እውን ነዚ ሰነድ ክውከሶ ኣብ ናይ ዝሓለፈ ሳምንቲ ዑደት መንግስቲ ኤርትራ ኣብ ስዑዲ ከማቃራሕ ተገይሩ እዩ ናሽናል ኢአር ኢንትረስት ታንክ ዩ ካልእ ኣገዳሲት ፅሑፍቲ እውን ኣላ ንዓዓ እውን ክንትንግፋ ኢና ምክንያቱ ምዚ ሒዝናዮ ዘለና ፕሮግራም ትኸይድ ስለ ዝኾነት ሓደ ሚኒስትሪ ኦፍ ኢንፎርሜሽን ናይ ኤርትራ ዘውፅኦ ፅሑፍ ኣሎ ነቲ ፅሑፍ ብምክንያት ኣብዚ ዝሓለፈ ግዜ ንተዘክሮ ጭፍጨፋ መግዛእቲ ዝገበርዎ ኣመልኪቱ ሚኒስትሪ ኦፍ ኢንፎርሜሽን ናይ ኤርትራ ዘውፅኦ ፅሑፍ ኣሎ ኣዝዩ ኣገዳሲ ፅሑፍ እዩ ምክንያቱ ነዚ ወርሒ እዚ ሒዝናዮ ዘለና ኣብ ታሪክ ህዝቢ ኤርትራ ብኸመይ ይረአይ እዩ ዝብሎ ሕዳር ኣብ ታሪክ ኤርትራ ወርሒ ሕዳር ንታሪክ ህዝቢ ኤርትራ ቅድሚ መግዛእቲ ድሕሪ መግዛእቲ ዝሓለፎ ፅንኩር መድረኻት ታሪክ ዝገጠሞ ዓለማዊ ወዲት መሪር ሓርነታዊ ተጋድሎን ዘይፀዓድ መኸትኡን ግፍዕታቱን ገዛእቲ ኢትዮጵያን ሰብኣውነት ህዝቢ ኤርትራን ካልእን ዘዘኻኽር ብዙሕ ፍጻሜታት ዝሰነደት ወርሒ እያ ካብዚ ዝስዕብ ዝርዝራት ክንደይኮን ንዝክር 15 ሕዳር 1869 ኢጣልያዊ ካህን ጁሰፔ ሳፔቶ ፍኖተ መግዛእቲ ንምፅራግ ካብ ክልተ ኣሕዋት ደቡብ ደንካልያ መርገፂ እግሪ ዝኸውን ንእሽቶ መሬት ተኻርዩ 17 ሕዳር 1875 ሃፀይ ዮሃንስ ኣብ ጉንደት ምስ ሰራዊት ግብፂ ገጢሙ ብሓገዝ ኤርትራውያን ዓወት ተጎናፂፉ ሕዳር 1885 ደርጎኛ ሰራዊት ራእሲ ኣሉላ ንምድሪ ኩናማን ናራን ወሪሩ ሰፊሕ ጃምላዊ ቅትለት ብምፍጻም ብዙሓት ዓድታት ኣቃፂሉ ንብረተንን ፅሪተንን ዘሚቱ 8 ሕዳር 1887 ጀነራል ዲላን ማርሳኖ ፍሉይ ኣሃዱ ሰራዊት መግዛእቲ ኢጣልያ መሪሑ ወደብ ምፅዋዕ ኣትዩ 24 ሕዳር 1887 ኢጣልያዊ ካብ ባፅዕ ንእምኩሉ ዝኸይድ መገዲ ባቡር ክትሃንፅ ጀሚራ 10 ሕዳር 1910 ኢጣልያ ንዜጋታታ ዘገልግል ፈነወ ሬድዮ ኣብ ባፅዕ መስሪታ 24 ሕዳር 1946 ኣብ ኣስመራ ካልኣይ ዋዕላ ቤት ጊዮርጊስ ተኻይዱ መጻኢ ዕድል ህዝቢ ኤርትራ ተዘቲይሉ 12 ሕዳር 1947 مرماريت كوميشن ودب حبرات هاجرات دليت حزب إيرترا نمتصنع أسمرة آتيا إسران حادن حدار شحنش عتم إتن 4 تشعتن حافشاو على حبرات هاجراتن قداي إيرتران إثيوبيان اتكتاتل كوميتي أقيمو إسران حادن حدار شحنش عتم إتن 50 الشيخ إبراهيم سلطان دليت حزب إيرتران الناتنت زنت إرمدرة أبو على حبرات هاجرات أسميو إسران شو عتن حدار شحنش عتم إتن 50 أمريكان مشاركتان أمام فدريشن إيرترامس إثيوبيا ناب حبرات هاجرات أقريبا كلتا حدار شحنش عتم إتن 50 شمونتن نعمت جزاءتي إثيوبيا بمقوام نملؤ ناتنت إيرترا زكالس من قسقاس حرنت إيرترا حركة وي محبر شوعات تمثريتو 14 حدار شحنش عتم إتن سوسان كلتن إثيوبيا بحبرات هاجرات زقوم فدريشن أفريقيا كاب حق وصاي ني إيرترا غوبيت أتا 30 حدار شحنش عتم إتن 7 سراويت مجزاءتي إثيوبيا كاب زعلت زي أجميرو أبورحي تحساس أب سنحيت أب عدتات بسكيدرا عنا قلبن كالوت سفح جاملاوي قتلات فتيمو إسران 4 حدار شحنش عتم إت 7 شوعتن قداي إيرترا بسلام نفتح زعل مزته أمونغو وكلتي هزباو جنبارن درجن أب برلين مبرأ جرمن تخيلو إسران حادن 11 شحنش عتم إت 7 شومونتن كال أي ورار سرعة درجي جميرو أب عبد يعقوب كبيد كوينات تخيلو 15 حدار شحنش عتم إت 8 هزباوي ويانا حارنت تግራይ بمجدي دمص حفاش إيرترا كاب ساحل ناب هزب إثيوبيا عمل أختي كم محلالف تفقيدلو فنو أنقا أمحارينيا جميرو إسران كلتان 11 شحنش عتم إت 8 هزباو جنبار قداي إيرترا بسلام زفتحلو أمام فدرش ريفرندم أقريبو إسران شو عتن 11 شحنش عتم إت 8 أمونغو تحاين هزباوي جنبارن عب كارتوم سممع مقرات تخصي تختمو إسران كلتان 11 شحنش عتم إتن 81 حزباو جنبار نسلسته شح مروخات كوينات إثيوبيا ناس علاقيقو ناب عدم أفانيمو إسرا 11 شحنش عتم إتن 89 أمونغو حزباو جنبارن سرعات درجن مغسل تازرب أتلانتا أب نيروبي ذات سلام تخيلو شدشته 11 شحنش عتم إتن 91 هاجراو أقلقلوت قبو كله إيرتراوي من إسي مخوانو زقلس قدامي أواج تأوجو شمونت 11 شحنش عتم إتن 9 حتى هاجراو بعد إيران أقفا تحاتيمو بوقعي سرحو جميرو بورد كفلي غازيتا ثانك يو مسايرت أنا حكم أزي مسجنكم بار نبتي كال أرستنا كنسجرينا قال أرستنا حزنا يزلنا أوكي رايت مسجاجر بهم قبر اوكي لما عنتم بار نابتينا جلوبال كنسجرينا انترناشونال ازي اقداسي تمرتي حيزلكم مصيلغو نعنا زخوننا تمرت له نحنا كيف لتنا زأتنايو كوينات حرامز አለው እንታዩ ደትብሉ ትህሉ ነፍስ ወከፍ ሰባብ ኢዱ ሒዝዎ ዘሎ ኣብ ከባቢ እዩ ዘሎ እንታይ ምዃኑ እስከ ይፈትሽ ብዛዕባኡ ክንርኢና ከይትረዳኣናዮ ኣቲናዮ ዘለና ኩናት እዩ እዚ ኩናት ናይ ሰሚኮንዳክተርስ ይበሃል እዚ ሰሚኮንዳክተርስ እንታይ እዩ ብዛዕባኡ ዝገልጽ ሓደ ኣዝዩ ኣገዳሲ ቶፒክ ሒዘልኩም መጽ ኣለኹ ምክንያቱ ንቢዝነስ ዝምልከት ኣብኡን ትምህርቲ ስለ ዘለዎ ኣብዛ ዓለምና ዝግበር ዘሎ ቅልስ كيرأنا ينحنا تتصنبرنا وغانو كارئكم كلهم كجرموكم يترادي كونس كما يكم زخون دلون كتريهم أبز على فجزي إذا كوفيد 19 مسمى إذا متى controversial كوينو مثلكم إذا كوفيد 19 بقو بت مرفض هو نازل له قال نجار كت خم حلال فلنا إمنا أكلاتنا إلي زغول سبت فرحنيو لك إذا فرح دما حكيو حجي كثري وياهم أزي أقداسي سلزخونه بحنساب كرينا مجمرتا سيميكوندكتورز انتايو ويكا تشاينان امريكان سلمنتا انز باسالو كنرينا شونا بت مين بوينت ان اوتينا
A blow to the United States in the semiconductor war, China has made a major breakthrough in the microchip manufacturing despite Washington's attempts to undermine Beijing's access to critical semiconductor technology. Now, according to reports, Huawei Technologies, the Chinese telecommunications giant, and also SMIC China's top chip maker have built an advanced 7-nanometer processor to power
لك زيها 7 نانومتر بروسيسور تبهال زيها أزيها قداسيت يعني مخنياتو تشاينا نكلن حليفاتن أبل ندي تزغبر أبز معرباوي نجزء موبايل نوعو خيترفع حليفاتو لا تي بروسيسور حليف ولو تي 7 نانومتر زبهال أزيو زدق أقيو كفيروس زدق أقيو كريكم يخجرمكمي كفيروس زدق أقيو فيروس بمايكروسوفت مجرأ أزي تشاينا بتي حطوا لله ما لكعكم إيو بروسيسور حجي كغرموكمي ازي دبأسن زلو ازي قا كلنا خم نونو اب ايدنا خم زلو اب مايكروويف አለው اب فريجات አለው اب ሚሳይላት አለው اب كلሎ لزن حيالات هاجرات زبأسن زلو ازي مخانو خدري ويكم حجي نحنا كيترዳኣና ኢና አቲና ዘለና ነትኩናት.
Its latest smartphone, the Huawei Mate 60 Pro. The teardown videos of the new smartphone show the phone powered by the new Kirin 9000 chip made entirely in China by SMIC. And this marks a huge breakthrough for the Chinese in the field of semiconductor technology. So why is this development so important, and what does it indicate for American sanctions on China?
Look, American China كاباي semiconductor أيتجز بأي زخرت كيو يا أخلكي لا سانكشن مزجبرت لا تشاينا خابل غير إلى ناتها سيمي كوندكتور جميرة أزي هواوي بهالت زعابة ناي موبايل فوينيو حجي أبز يوروب كيتر بقاتي نيرو قلتيهم على أبل إنجلن كومبلين مزجبرو من قصة أمريكا ناتنا ناي سكيورتي ترت يفرحنا أيو أو تسوى تباهيلو أو تأمه كابز يوروب كون جوجل بعال قلن بمولو كم زي سرح جيرو أبتي موبايل فانكشن كم زي هلوه مزجبرو إذا كل سبز جزء أنت الموبايل ذات تبلاشوا حجين متى أمزيلك أمريكا هقول لك زي خد تكالات كعبل أخ جمروا خلوا أنت أتجبر نسيلكم سانكشن أتجبر له حجي تشاينا سانكشن مسجبروا لا نعان سبق أخوينه ده حنكر يكون من غير تايم قبل كم زلوا كرد أكم يمكنكم.
US-China chip saga started in 2019. The Americans decided to restrict Chinese firms from accessing essential tools that are required to manufacture the most advanced chips. This led to many companies, including Huawei, launching limited batches of 5G smartphone models using stockpiled chips. Moreover, the United States also got its allies, Japan and the Netherlands, to launch a semiconductor equipment ban on China jointly. But now, with the release of the new...
Look, American China أبتناي semiconductors قبل أزلوا كويناتيز حجقلتين يزواجوا أزلوا أتزير كويناتيز خيد زلوا بزير تفضل أزلكم مغنياتو زي semiconductor طعم أقداسي أب مكاين يقدس كله أبزي نهيوتنا ملو كيترዳኣنا نقبره طعم يزقدس إذا موبايل بروسيسور ناتن فاست خونن كزحلن أبزي يقدس بملو إذا سكرين تري ولا لكم بدحرين تصحفوا دلنا بملو إذا بسيليكون إذا قومي كثري ويهم نتو باور إذا دبا أسن زلو زي أتن إذا خابي يدركب ويك أماني خوننو أماني خحوزون إذا برودكت زين دحريكم كلها سخا أنا تي ذي حزو بهوتنا يتعوضهم زلو فلوت حجبزي نفس وكفسب بناتنا واقع يم تسعوت دلون ساتهم حجب زحالفك زينا تشاينا لعلو حلافنا أمريكا مسكر انتايلو أبتنا ميليتاري زقبر كسمامعو كوينات كي يقبروا مأنتي كرادادو تسمامعهم تري واللهم تقبروا دلو تقوتا بس بفلسطين من قالن مشته علم ملئتي تقوايل لا واج تولى بتي زي أتوم كلتي يوم كن زفرحهم نجار اللهم كلتي يوم أتي سامي كوندكتر من تقوت أسألت الزلات تست بهال ويتي وانا وز بهال قلت أفد بهال من تقوت أسأل يدل لقى تشاينا قريفة تأخير دلنا أمريكا نعوق عنكو في أتفتن دلها أتقبر نس نيذرلاند أقدي إلاتا نجابان أقدي عن تشاينا إلاتا يقول لهم تونكون جنا أخري وياهم قالوا هم كريكمي.
Phone, it looks like the Chinese have beaten the Americans in their own game. Huawei has started selling its Mate 60 Pro phone last week, although features like satellite calls were made public. The company had offered no information on the type of chipset that is used. Interestingly, early buyers of the phone have been posting teardown videos and are sharing speed tests on social media. The videos suggest that the phone is in fact capable of download speeds that exceed those of the top-line 5G phones.
لك أتي تلفون تمالي زن نايلو مكلتا سومنا بلا China produce جبرتن بدي semiconductors ساكريت جبرتو ما نم تلفون أبز عالم create تجبره فتيمو زير كبو عينت كوينو وإذا أبل قدفو أبل رابشيو أبل كون دحريقمو قمتي لكم بدحريقان دحريقمو made in China assembled in California يدبل أب China تسريحو ኣብ ካሊፎርኒያ ጥራይ ኣሰምብል ገይሮሞ ትሕቁ ወይ ገለ ዘጋጣጠሙሉ ዝበዝሐ ኣብ ቻይና እዩ ተሰሪሑ ሕጂ ኣሜሪካ ነዚ ኣን ቻይና ክትዕንቅፃ ፈቲና ምክንያቱ ክትገድፋ ምስ ፈተነት ገዲፋታ ብኢኮኖሚ ብገለ ምስ ገደፈታ በቃ ጠጠው ከተብላ ትፍትና ኣላ ሕጂ ኩናት ትሪእዎ ኣለኹም ነዚአን ሃገራት እዚኣተን ንኸይድ
including the Apple iPhone. The Mate 60 Pro is priced at about 6,999 yuan. That's about 964 American dollars. And with the release of this new phone, it looks like China is now making some serious headway in its attempt at building a chip ecosystem that is entirely built domestically within China. Beyond is now...
Okay, نغير حجي نابت main point كنرينا. أزي chip انتايو. انتاي زبا أسن زلو. أزي CD تذكروا تلقونكم ذركبكم له CD منالو. CD زي CD ذركبكم له نحرا لكم كونكم. لك الCD كتسعود كله بمليونات ويبا أشحات chips. دك تسقى يتريو chips زقومي CD. يقول لهم زي قدمي متاونا نحريهما. أتين حجي منادك أو نوع نتر كرنا دلو ماليس كان دا بزخدع عينتي زلو تكوينات. حجي نوع زي الدقيق بقى هاب فيروس دقيق يمسريهم زلو تشاينا حجي جيشوفوا خريقكم ينسو حجي أبزخ خريقويهم.
The US and China are fighting a war. It's not a war that you can really see, and it's not a traditional battlefield war with soldiers, at least not yet. This is a war that's being fought in government offices and company boardrooms. It's a
ولك أمريكان China أنا نسخ من زيري أو كويناتك يكايد اللوا. إذا كوينات زي بأكل بجبري ويكاب وتهدر زجبرا يكونن. إذا كوينات زي فلي عينت كوينات زكايد زلوا. على مجن أيتر يعني هذا كيس أتخيل العالم نازي.
war that's being fought with rules and regulations, and it's meant to stop rivals from getting their hands on the most important technology in the world, microchips. You might hear them called semiconductors, microchips, or integrated circuits. These are all the same thing. We're just gonna call them chips, microchips, tiny pieces of metal that are magic and that run our world. This is a big thing that's happening in geopolitics right now. And I want to help you understand the stakes of this new conflict between the US and China. It's going to be the center of global attention for years to come. And what we're seeing right now is how boring trade regulations and business rules can escalate to something that can impact your everyday life. Because your life depends on chips, whether you...
سمعهم وإذا فتيهم أي فتهم وك أحد سب فتيو أي فتو أبزق زيزي أبزن chips كنقرنا يحجنسو أو depends on لايفنا لك إذا الموبايل أنا نسخهم نري أزلنا doesn't matter أبي يكون كاتر إن لها تلفزيون كون أبجلهون device يجن تري إن زلها نعيد وين عهم أو زريخوكم زلهم بمول أذا سكرين حسكم هذا لهم موبايل بتشيبس زقامتها أزيد دقيقة تشيبس بحدا اللقاقيهم بهم يمسريهم حجي بك أبزي بوخ النبرك أين غقدنينا لك هيوت ناسي أو تيمهم زلوا خريقكمي كيترዳኣና ኢና نحنا جوين غيرنا انا توكينات مرجعون يبنا ببقربات إمامنا خمزي نحد قول عشكور تطعمو كيف تناأتينا هنا توكينات كثيروا ياكم
know it or not. In fact, let me show you. Everything has silicon in it. Anything that has any technological smartness to it is a product of silicon.
لك زخونه يكون ناي تكنولوجي زلو ديفايس لومي عبيدكم زلو عب كبابيكم زلو بالسيليكون زي قومي يبلكم زلو حج حلف حالفو تسي اب امريكا زلو سيليكون فالي دبهال شمو كابزي يوصي مخنيات بزحات كامباني او تدراديرن كسر حمز جمرا بزح زبلون سيليكون فالي دبرشيم هيومو اجيتنا امريكا زعابه تك كامباني اب سيليكون فالي يدلو بمولو زحاس كايب كبابي خدلو بالسيليكون زي قومي درديرو غرينا ايو اينا ايت سيليكون زبهال سيليكون زلو نبرت
when it's not just like the usual suspect techie things. Yep, microchip. My refrigerator, silicon. My microwave, silicon. Nah, I'm just playing with you. This doesn't have silicon in it. This is just a few little things I found around the office, but like silicon is in your refrigerator, your microwave, like it is in your digital clock. It is what makes our world go round. I mean, we are speaking through silicon right now. Like you are watching this on the internet that is made possible because of silicon on a screen that is being fired by a silicon chip. Like everything is silicon in our world.
لك إذا عجز صغم عين صغم من الرأي زلنا يبلوكم له بسيليكون صار سيليكون ينان رأي كل درجات بزحة نايز على مملؤ بس سيليكونيو أي مزلة حجينا السيليكون بدهري خامنا له تشيبس بهالكمسيو بو إذا له حجة تكوينات نريد.
Besides like the forest or something, or like, you know, analog cameras. So microchips make our economy possible, but it's not just tech. It's not just like consumer tech. It's also military. The military needs microchips.
It's also the military. At the military, microchips يدليو. إذا تري ولا لهم ميسايلات بguided دبهال ميسايل كسرح كله. ت microchip important يزي. أزي microchip China عندها حركة تسرح جميرة. كنت قوس أسرع بعد دهوينا مالتي. نا أمريكا أزيو أقداسي إزي microchip. حسكم ولا لهم تبوينت حجي. دحردانا بإيد China آتيو ت microchip. نا أمريكا ميسايل كتسندو خلا نت ميسايل halfway مسبتها نابجا زار ساعة ملسلات غليا. معناته كنترول مايكروشيب China زفريتوي. إزاي دفر حمد الله حجمن تقوت أسرع. سلمتايا أمريكا تايوان كتكلا خللا تقوين. دحريكم تيس عن حموشتن كاب عالمنا كاب ميتي أب تايوان يوتي مايكروشيب زفري. China هدبت ندحرا تقوت أسيراتها بمول تقوت أسرع. أمالتي نتناي أمريكا زدلها. زلمان أمريكا زي زفرها. سلازي أخذ حلوات فتن نجابان China Taiwan.
They need microchips for weapon systems. They need microchips for intelligence. They need microchips for AI. They need microchips to stay ahead of their rivals. Microchips represent geopolitical power because
microchips بقى نمول عالم قدم تاينيرو تزحيله من تقصاصر تاينيرو غزي نيرو نداد تقصاصر غزي نيرو حيل نيرو أربعتات خمساتات سوساتات نادي بقيد كله بدحر يقليو زمن كأورك نيرو حجينا عبز كزينا زي حزوه مايكروشيب تقوت أثره باور تقوت أثره يقدر له تكزي بزي أطرح حزوه حجيه that's why 5G China زقبرته يوروب بملء أكاد يوروب كم زود أجرهم مغنياتو تقوت أثره ناي China إلهم إذا كن مغنياتي تقوت أثرهم China تقوت أثرهم دي كونت نتناتهم تكنولوجي كأتوه أنت دعاد اليوم نتناتهم حزبي تكونسيمر كهبو أنت دعاد اليوم China ندرت well let's say assume that Huawei زبرت part زريحو مازلو 900 خوينا واقع ابل كاشحن 500 خوينا من يخجز لهم ناي ابل حسبوه زبز حسب نابت هواوي خيد طعم ريلابل باتري نوح صنحه تي فاست دخونه داونلود اللو ازي تفللي تري والله ازي يفرحوا منسو حجنا عخايش ابتو واقع توخا ايقدسو من نحتا ጨፋጭፍካ.
They represent military power. That's something to just keep in mind as we go through this story.
House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi is in Taiwan.
لك زي أنا تايوان كيداني رازا أمريكاويت نانسي بولوسي بحال هاوس أوف سبيكر ناي أمريكا نتايوان كيدا مش تشاينا بزح مفحبحات نيروب تجزي من تايوان كيدا تبعيلو مغنياتو تايوان بتشاينا كم حنتي sovereign nation هيتقوت أرنيا أكال جزءاتية إلى سلة قطرة تشاينا زي الصحابهم دحر كم بعد أمريكا أنا تشاينا أنا تايوان آتيوم كم هاجر فليت أمالو مالتي زي دبا أسنسو بلاس مايكروشيب إذا سبيتنا بكيدا نبتي مايكروشيب بسر حلو ناي تايوان بوتا أخيدا يسكم لهم كسب كندي powerful مخان رأي.
Tonight, China is already responding.
Lead the world in future industries, protect our national security.
We're in the middle of one of the most fundamental changes in the character of war in the history of mankind.
Hey, pause. I feel really strongly that the internet is a place where you can learn to level up your professional skills. I learned all my skills on the internet. That is how I know how to animate and edit and film and do all of these things. The sponsor of today's video also believes this. Thank you, Scalar, for sponsoring.
Okay, أجي أبزي أزي ذريكم زلوا سب بزح زي فولو إلي تايد جبر سبونسر عليه. نعاهم نتوم تسمع عند لهم دك عادة كنا نقولكم زل زلوي. 100 شيخ قال زلهم إيرتراوين عليه كم زي فولورز زلوا. أجي تكالات زلكم ندحر لكم كونكم حنسابيهم سبونسر تجبروا من سبات حزوني. بخمو بيزنس غيري. أدزن ما ترى بيعدل لها. تكالك هتلالي ندحر ده لها. نبزي 100 قال الشيخ زلوا سب تهبوا مو. one of payment يخات جبر نبل $500 ويقال تخفله that's it السب advertise يجبر لك حنسب advertise مس جبره بلو معلت لايف ندهر دعوي له 3 ساعات أشحات سبات يوم زر إلو نتسب ناتك advertise دما نوح عمتها أو سلزر أنا عاقم تأمكمي حجي خذ حاسبوا لكم بس إيرتراوي يعني توم سب business سب مال نزل لهم ሰማልኩም ኣሙላ ዓለም ክፍለጠልኩም ትደልዩ ከምዛ ዓይነት ታክቲክ ተጠቀሙ ብዙሓት ዘለዎም ኤርትራውያን ኣለዎ ኣድቨርታይዝ ግበሩለይ ዋን ኦፍ ክትብልዎም ትኽእሉ ኢኹም እዚ ታክቲክ ተጠቀሙ ብኸም እዮም እዚኦም ሰባት ሓፍ ድብሉ ኩሉ ኢኻ ትረባባሕ ማለት እዩ
In today's video, Scalar is a place where you can go and level up your skills as a programmer or engineer. Scalar is a short-term
لك عجنا زودي أم نوس وكف السو بوست دبلو فيديو المليونات أم معلتي أبزر لكم دلهم حنت معلتي بوست كله مليونات فيورز يمزلوا حجينا عم أم حنت جزء سبونسر عليهم كم زي نوع سبونسر يقبلوا لنا الفيديو that's it one of them تقبلوا حجتهم إيرتراويان نابو level up كتقبلوا لكم كتجيبوا لكم نابز خمسة عين السيستم
accelerator program. It's like 8
نريد نبتي توبيكنا نريد حجي نبتي سيمي كوندكتور نريد
In 1959, the US was about to get very lucky. Computers at the time were becoming a thing, but they kind of looked like this. Tons of wires connect.
تريوا لهم عجيب باك جراوند يهبنا له ويكاد حربايتا بشحن جعت بيت 50 جعت زنبر عين السيستم ناي كمبيوترات كابزي نابي كم زواره دخل يكم يجي بتاعمي زجرم
everything, all of them sending little precise electronic signals to each other to solve tedious, complex math problems. It was clunky, it was inefficient, it wasn't very special yet. But then two American engineers that were working separately at two totally different companies had a very similar idea. And the idea was to get rid of this, all these wires. There was this new technology that had cropped up.
لك كلتا انجينيرات تراقبهم امريكا اذا كل عينت وايرات زغم عينت قحمت متزبل نقليو ناب حدا ادقيقنا ناب حدا نسرحيو زبل حساب امتيهم بوقومو خيرو جميرو مالتيهم كلتيهم
called a transistor. It was like a really precise, reliable on and off switch. Allows you to control pulses of electricity super precisely. But at first, transistors looked like this. They were big and clunky. Lots of parts. So the idea was, what if we start carving these little on and off switches onto a material called silicon? It's like a super abundant metal-like material inside of Earth's crust. But it's actually a horrible conductor of electricity. If you mix silicon with other elements, it conducts electricity really well. It is a semiconductor of electricity. Exactly what they needed to precisely control the flow of electricity very accurately. No more clunky long wires. Let's just carve our little transistor switches onto this silicon chip, a single circuit. That way we can fit a lot more into one place, all close together. So that's what they did. And then the world changed forever.
With the transistor, man has gone far toward matching some of the capacity of the human brain.
Okay, real quick aside here. We're going to get to the geopolitics and stuff, but I was so curious about one thing. Why does being able to precisely control the on and off switch or like the flow of electricity do anything to change the world? Well, it turns out, this is where my mind bends a little bit. Just stick with me here. So transistors can turn on and off, and they send a signal that results in one of two things, a 1 or a 0 when it gets to the other side. Super boring and useless if you just have one little transistor sending a 1 or a 0. But if you have 1,000 of these switches, all sending little signals in the right order, suddenly you have something that kind of resembles a little brain. Fire.
لك أتي سيمي كوندكتور أسرارحو أخنا قرقم تسأني حجي حنقول نادك سبات درجة يزمثل تسرارحو بحنت سب كومباين مسجبرو مستأرنفوا أركيقهم مسجبرو لك حنقول يزمثل أسرارحو.
Signals in a coordinated system that can actually solve logical mathematical problems and literally remember things. This is kind of how our brain works. It's pulses, lots of pulses. And now we're talking about computing. This is how computers work. The more pulses of electricity you can control, the more you can do with technology. And suddenly, there's a new gold rush in the United States. But the gold is now silicon, and the rush is to put as many of these little switches onto that silicon chip as possible so that we can make our technology do more and more sophisticated stuff. And now people have smarter clocks and TVs and radios and video games and calculators. Things that you can hold in your hand and press a bunch of buttons, and suddenly the silicon chip is solving math problems for you instantaneously. What is happening? This is magic. Oh, and it's not just tech bros in the 60s who are loving this. The US military and NASA are first in line to get their hands on these new chips. They dream of using them for more sophisticated weapons or going to the moon.
Only £9 and 56 pence. These hiking shoes are 70% off on Temu.
Chips were becoming a currency for national power. We gotta protect them, thinks the USA. Luckily, The USA didn't really have to do much to protect them at first. They were killing it. They were the global leaders of this chip-making stuff. Every year, US companies crammed more and more transistors onto this little piece of silicon. More calculations per second. More and more companies are now cropping up to make dreams come true with their new magical microchips. Lots of this action was happening right here in Central California, in a valley that would soon take on the name of the material that enabled all this magic to happen. By the mid-1980s, they were carving nearly 300,000 little on and off switches onto a piece of silicon. Oh, and look, it's Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
Yes!
They're using these more sophisticated silicon chips to change the course of history. Home computing, color televisions, more advanced satellites, and smaller electronic devices of all kinds. There's a revolution happening. And over the next 30 years, the number of transistors that they can fit onto a piece of silicon starts to become ridiculous. And it's like the 90s, and these things are getting faster and smaller, and now humans have computers in their homes that are more advanced than the ones that were used to land on the moon.
Not only do they play the typical computer games that all the kids enjoy, but their curiosity for learning has skyrocketed.
And look, it's even smaller now. It fits in your pocket.
And we are calling it iPhone.
None of this is possible without these little magical brains made of silicon.
سجي زي سيليكون زي chips زي ناي ايفون ناي قلمله فتصم كون اي كعلن حجي تكوينات كجمر.
Okay, but then a problem arises, and it has to do with these. These look like just factories where they make microchips, right? No, these are not just factories. We have a special name for these. They're called fabs, and they are a central part of this story. Because listen, cramming tens of millions of transistors onto a piece of metal-like substance from the Earth is hard to begin with. But as the number of transistors continues to double and double and double, making them becomes incredibly complicated. I mean, look at these operations. This is inside of a fab, and the reason why it looks like they're doing open heart surgery here is because even a single speck of dust that gets into this fab and onto one of these chips can totally ruin it. So yeah, it was American companies who are designing and making chips, but every year they have to spend more and more on these tedious fabs, these factories on steroids. They're getting really spendy, like billions of dollars spendy. Meanwhile, an ocean away, you've got a couple of economic miracles happening in all of these countries in East Asia that are rapidly developing.
لك حجي أبز جزيزي China عندما عبدت مسؤول زلا جزيئو China كمية كدليعيو ويبخمي كدك أمالي إنكلتين دحر كمي كبقى سائن كريكومي.
They want in on this microchip gold rush.
لك زي سوني كاسيو ناشيونال جلز بحال ذكروا تدأخونكم ناي سمانياتات ناي تسعاتات بفلاي زم مجرشة تسعاتات زنبر جزيات ذكرون تدأخونكم زي بعل جابان عبلي رالو زنبرنا جزي بعل دحري ينتفي بعل زكاسيو زيتاتي دحري ينتفي إمبر تعمين كيدا نيران ساتن تبقى بزي ناي سرحات ناي سامي كوندكتر.
One of these countries is Japan, where a bunch of new tech companies were getting really good at making chips, and they could make them and sell them for way cheaper than the US. Oh, and by the way, this was with the help of the Japanese government who's like subsidizing this. Governments love microchips. That's going to be a theme in this video.
لك عبز انت حجي جابان سيمي كوندكترز سريحة بزحاسرة نا أمريكا خشوت أو جميرة مالتي كابتي نا أمريكا وناوش تعد زلو زحاسرة شيء سلز جمرت أزي بغميات زحاسرة شيء جميرة سابسايد قبروا لا جميرهم سابسايد مالت منقستي بزوح يخاف للك نتي توز أو وصايتات درجاي بزوح يخاف يشفن لك أزي نت كامباني تات يتابع بعمو سدد كله أي شيء قرني ده سواء بحصور شيء جاء أبزي شجرك في التاري مالتي.
So the US is hating this. They're kind of freaking out that Japan is getting in on all the chip gold rush. They got to do something about it. So it's 1987 and the US government basically says, no more Japanese chips. They put a 100% tax on Japanese chips.
لك أبشحن شنجعت من سمانة جوعتني إنه أمريكان تايلو بقى زخونة يكون chips كاب جابان كمثلنا يقولون أنت جيروم عيتوتوي بولو من 100% كرس كم زخوف الجيروم من حد ناي زخونة يكون percent نبتعد زاتو إذا أنت مالتي كده يتبولو كم زغير جبرو كم عم جيرومات في أمم جابان كا يداوم سيحبهم عجيز زو بروديس دقابرو زلو بتعدهم chips نابيك شتوه ونحن عدا آخر قبلو خقول اللو عبزي زلوتي بأسي هجي دحريت تماريش يزمت أكون دلنا بكزي نخمت ناب كتاشن إسران ሰለስተና ቢሉ ክመፀኩም እዩ
coming into the US, which not surprisingly just crushes Japan's chip industry. Too bad, so sad, Japan, said the president at the time, who was, wait, what the hell? Ronald Reagan? The prophet of free markets and free trade? What's going on here?
Our aim is to increase our national wealth.
ልክ በዓል ሮናልድ ሬገን ዝነበሮ ፍሪ ማርኬት ፍሪ ትሬድ ዝብል ፕሪንሲፕል በዓላቶም ዘተኣታትውዎ ብድሕሪ እዚ ናይ ጃፓን ዝገበርዎ ክኸዱ ማች ክገብሩ ይከኣለን ጃፓን በቃ ዓፅዮማን ጃፓን ብዙሓት ካምፓኒታት ኣብ ክሳራ ኣትየን ኣብ ጃፓን ማለት እዩ ትግዜቲ
So all will have more.
Well, turns out that chips are really important. So important, in fact, that Mr. Free Market Economics abandoned his principles to protect American chips. This is a theme. We're going to see a lot more of it. Okay, so let's move on. Meanwhile, another Asian economic miracle country is growing super fast and wants to get in on this. But they also are looking over at Japan and they're like, we don't want the US to squash us for trying to compete with them. So if we can't beat them, let's join them.
Look, حجي أبزمن تمسألة تايوان تمسألة. ካብ ጃፓን ስለ ዝተማሃረት ኦኬ ምስ ኣሜሪካ ክንወዳደር ኣይንኽእልን ኢና ስለዚ ምስኣቶም ክንወዳደር እንድሕር ዘይንኽእል ኮይና ብመሓዝኦም ብምዃን ንእተውዎ ነቲ ቢዝነስ ዝብል ኣይድያ ከምፅኦም
Oh, and this is a really important foreshadow here. Taiwan is looking over here at their neighbor China, who's also getting really rich and more serious about making good on their lifelong promise to eventually invade Taiwan and, quote, reunite it with China. Kind of scary. So in the back of Taiwan's mind, they're also kind of looking for a way to get the West to protect them. So they made a bet. A freaking brilliant bet that solved all their problems at once. At the time, a bunch of engineers in Taiwan were actually leaving Taiwan to go to the US, to go to university there.
ሕጂ ኣብዚ ታይዋን እንታይ ገይሮም ቻይና ክትወሮም እያ ወይ ከዓ ክትወረና ኢሎም ኩሉ ግዜ ስለ ዝፈርሑ እንታይ ገይሮም ሓደ ነገር ንስራሕ ኢሎም ደቆም ጃፓን ሃብኒ ታይዋናውያን ንኣሜሪካን ዩኒቨርሲቲ ሰይዶሞ ትምህርቲ ክሰድዎም ከለዉ ግን ስቂሎም ኣይሰደድዎም እንታይ እዮም ገይሮም ሴሚኮንዳክተርስ ከመይ ከም ዝሰርሕ ኣምሂሮሞም ብዕላማ ማለት እዩ ልክዕ ቻይና ከምኡ እያ ገይራ እዚኦም ታይዋን ነቶም ኤርትራውያን ከማ ነዚ ፅቡቅ ትምህርቲ እዩ ነቲ ሴሚኮንዳክተርስ ከመይ ከም ዝሰርሕ ካብ ኣሜሪካ ምስ ተማሃሩ ብምሉኦም ድሕሪ ምምሃሮም ኣብኡ ይተረፉን ወይ ኣብ ካልእ ኣይከዱን ብምሉኦም ንዓዶም እዮም ተመሊሶም ዳስ ወይ ኣብዚ ግዜ እዚ ታይዋን 95% ካብ ዓለምና ሴሚኮንዳክተር ኣፍራይት ትበሃል ምክንያቱ ብምሉእ ዝተማሃረ ንደገ ወፂኡ ተመሊሱ ናብቲ ዓዲ ማለት እዩ
And then to actually work for US companies in the cutting-edge microchip economy. Texas Instruments, Intel. So the first thing the Taiwanese government does is lure them back. They guarantee them jobs, they pay for their travel costs, they give them tax breaks to create companies. Their goal is to create a Silicon Valley in Taiwan, and it totally works. It's like a reverse brain drain. Thousands of engineers return to Taiwan to start companies and to help build the microchip industry in Taiwan. And one of those engineers is the one who actually changed the game. It's this guy named Morris Chang. He had the best idea of all of them. He had seen that American chip makers were hating how much money they had to invest in these fabs, these really complicated factories to make microchips. His idea was, instead of trying to compete with the United States in the chip industry and get crushed like Japan did, let's become their friend. Let's solve their problem. We won't design chips, we won't make devices, we won't make the software, we will just make the chips themselves. We will become the masters of fabs, the tedious, expensive job of getting more and more transistors onto a piece of silicon. So he starts a company called Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. Super promising and creative name, Morris. And the government of Taiwan is super into it. Because now they can get in on the chip gold rush, and instead of pissing off the United States, they actually will solve the US's problem. And, crucially, make the US reliant on them. So now they have protection, a silicon shield to protect them from their big aggressive neighbor. The government gave nearly half of the startup costs to
ልክ ኣብዚ ታይዋን እንታይ እዮም ገይሮሞም ንኣሜሪካ ብሓንጎል እዮም ተፃዊቶም ብሎም በቲ ቺፕስ ኣሜሪካ ኣብ ኣቶም ዲፐንድ ከም ትኸውን ገይሮማ እሱ ጥራይ ደይኮነ ካብ ቻይና ከም ትከላኸለሎም ገይሮማ ልክዕ ዳስ ዋይ ኣሜሪካ ኩሉ ግዜ ጃፓን ቻይና ታይዋን ክትላዓል ከላ ንቻይና ተፈራርሃ ግደፊ ትብላ ልክዕ ሕጂ እቶም ታይዋን ጽቡቕ ጌም ተፃዊቶም ኣብዚኣ ማለት እዩ
Morris Chang to start this new venture. They connected him to venture capital, and according to Chang himself, the Prime Minister of Taiwan even called a super rich Taiwanese investor to force him to invest in TSMC. Whoa. Okay, yeah, wow. Like you can see just how vital chips are. A little piece of silicon with a bunch of on and off switches. TSMC was basically a state-owned company from the beginning. So yeah, Taiwan's now in the game, and semiconductors are now becoming a geopolitical bargaining chip. A geopolitical bargaining chip. I kind of regret it. Sorry.
Go in here, and I'm
I believe I'm going to be the nominee.
So it's like the early 2000s, and semiconductors are now squarely a part of geopolitics. But meanwhile, in business world, in Silicon Valley, they are loving this Taiwan situation. Because now, instead of having to do all of this expensive, tedious fab stuff, they can just do the design and the software and the business side of it, and they can just ship it off to TSMC.
ልክ ኣብዚ ሕጂ እዞም ሲሊኮን ቫሊ ኣሜሪካ እንታይ ይገብሩ ዲዛይን ይገብሩሉ ብዙሕ ነገር ይገብሩሉ ናብ ታይዋን ይሰድዎ ታይዋን ዝበዝሐ ፓርት ምእንቲ ክሰርሖ ልክዕ ምን ቻይና ከምኡ እዮም ገይሮም ናይ በዓል ኣይፎን ናይ በዓል ገለ እንድሕር ኢኹሞ እቲ ዲዛይን እንት ካልእን ኣብ ካሊፎርኒያ ገብርዎ እቲ ዝበዝሐ ፓርት ግን ኣብ ቻይና ይስራሕ ሕጂ ሙሉእ ብሙሉእ ዳርጋ ዝበዝሐ ኣብ ኣሜሪካ ዲፐንድ ኮይኖም ኣሜሪካ ብልዕሊ ኣብ ቻይና ዲፐንድ ኮይና ፀኒሓ ሕጂ ምስ ተባእሱ እንታይ ሽግር ከም ዘምፃሎም ናበይ ገጾም ይኸዱ ከም ዘለዉ ክዝርእዎም ይኾን
and they do the rest, taking on the expensive, tedious work of maintaining their fabs and keeping them up to the cutting edge, which requires billions of dollars every year. Like, to keep some perspective, look at this graph. This is the number of transistors on a piece of silicon. By 2010, they're now getting 1 billion transistors onto a piece of silicon the size of your fingernail. And the only way to do that is to make each one of these insanely small. So let's just take a moment to blow our own.
ሕጂታ ሲዲ ምግጃፋ ዝነበረት ኣቐዲመ ዝበልኩኹም እታ ቺፕስ ናብታ ናይ ኢድ ኣብ ኢድ ጥራይ ከም ትተሓዝ ገይሮማ እንዳድቀቕዋ ኸይዶም ገና ካብኣ ዝደቅቕ ከማን ከሪአኩም እዩ
minds here. Each transistor is becoming smaller than a width of a human hair. Wait, no, sorry.
ልክ ሕጂታ ትራንዚስተርስ ካብዚ ናይ ጨጉር ናይ ደቂ ሰባት ካብኡ ዝደቀቐት እንዳኾነት ከይዳ ምግጃፋ ማለት
Sorry, that's actually way too big of a scale. A human hair is like 90,000 nanometers thick. We need to go smaller, like a red blood cell. Wait, no, that's still too big. 7,000 nanometers. Okay, a virus, something that's not even totally alive. It's so small. Wait, that's 14 nanometers. Still too big. I mean, we are getting into insane scales here. IBM recently revealed.
ስለዚህ ቫይረስ 14 ናኖሜትር እንተ ደኣ ኮይኑ ትማሊ ቻይና ኣናውንስ ዝገበረቶ 7 ናኖሜትር ጥራይ ዝምግጃፋ ቺፕ ሰሪሐ ኢላ ሪኦሎም ካብቲ ቫይረስ ሲኣፀቢቓ ብዕፅፊ ዝትሕት ብትንእሽ ማለት እያ ናበይ ገፁ ይወስደና ኣለዎ ሕጂ እንተኢልኩም እንተ ደኣ ንሰብ ኢንጀክት ገይሮምሉ ናብ ኣብ ኣካላቱ ኮፍ ክብል ይኽእል እዩ ወላ ሓንቲ ፀገም ዘይብሉ ከም ፈሳሲ ኮይኑ ይከኣቱ ይኽእል ማለት እዩ ብከምኡ ክቆፃፅሮ ንዓለም ይደልዩ ከም ዘለዉ ብዙሕ ግዜ ተዘሪብ ምክንያቱ እዚ ቢልዮነር ንሱ ከይተረፈ ናቱ ትካል ናይ ጥዕና መስሪቱ ዓለም ብከምኡ ክቆፃፀራ ይደሊ ከም ዝነበረ ቢልጌትስ ሓቲት እዩ ብዙሕ ግዜ እውን ኦፈር ገይሩ እዩ ንብዙሓት ኣገራት ኮሚታት ገይሩ ሕጂ ናብ ኣፍሪቃን ናብ ተመሳሳይ ዓለም እዮም ብዙሕ ግዜ ሳድሊ ዝፍትንዎ
the chip with transistors that are 2 nanometers thick, making them literally smaller than a strand of DNA. So in these fabs, the reason it looks like this is because they have to figure out how to do this and to keep doing it and keep making it smaller and smaller, providing the world with the most advanced chips. And this is why we have nice things. Your entire world revolves around what is happening on these little strips of silicon. More and more US chip companies don't actually have fabs. They design them, they do all the software and the machinery and the selling and the business, but the actual making of the chip happen in Taiwan. But as 92% of all advanced chips are now made in Taiwan, what this means is that the US is completely reliant on TSMC, basically.
ልክ ሕጂ 92% ናይ ቺፕስ ኣብ ሙሉእ ዓለም ዘሎ ኣሜሪካ ብፍላይ ትጥቀመሉ ኣብ ታይዋን ድሕር ደኣ ዝስራሕ ኮይኑ እዚ ማለት ኣሜሪካ ብሙሉእ ኣብ ታይዋን ዲፐንድ ኮይና ኣላ ማለት እዩ ሕጂ ተስዋይ ቀዲመ ዝበልኩም ቻይና እንተ ታይዋን ክትጎብጣ ፈቲና ብተዘዋዋሪ ንኣሜሪካ ትጎብጣ ከም ዘላ ፍለጡ ምክንያቱ እቲ ቺፕስ ኣዝዩ ኣገዳሲ ስለ ዝኾነ ንኣሜሪካ ኣብቲ ሚሳይል ተድልያ እዩ ኣብቲ ኮምፒውተራት ተድልያ ኣብ ኩሉ ነገር ንገብሮ ዘለና የድልያ ስለ ዝኾነ ንታይዋን እንተ ተቆፃፂራታ ንኣሜሪካ ሓንጎላ ከም ተቆፃፀረታ እዩ እዚ እዩ ደባእሶም ኩሉ ግዜ ሕጂ ኣብቲ ናይ ኣሜሪካ ንምንታይ ሚሊታሪ ቤዝ ኣለዎ ኣብ ጥቓ ቻይና ጥራይ
And finally, we're getting to the conflict. This is where China becomes really important. Because China, the most populous country, is suddenly very rich. And they want new tech too. So they become actually a giant customer of all these chips, buying 40% of all the chips in the world, meaning that they are now reliant on the US, who is reliant on Taiwan, to design and make their chips. So let's look at the modern chip industry as it all comes together, which is going to set the stage for how this conflict is playing out today. Here's a very simplified version of the supply chain. Again, very simplified. It's just insane. I'm not going to go into the full thing. The US is the one that manufactures the machines, the software, and the designs. Japan makes metals and chemicals for chips. The Netherlands makes this crazy UV laser machine that is used to carve the chips. And Taiwan, crucially, does the expensive, tedious job of actually making the chip. Almost all of the most advanced chips in the world are made in Taiwan. And then you have China, who is the giant customer in all of this. They're the ones who are buying more and more chips to grow their economy. I mean, look at this beautiful supply chain. You've got a bunch of countries that are involved now. Everyone has a part to play, and everyone depends on each other for chips. Globalization is great. Economic interdependence is a recipe for peace and mutual prosperity. Right?
ሕجሪኹም ዶ ንምንታይ ቻይናን ኣሜሪካን ንኩናት ክኣትዋ ከም ዘይደልያ እዚ ተቐንዲ ሪዝን ክልቲአን ንሕድሕደን ኣብዚ ማይክሮቺፕስ ዲፐንድ ዝኾና እየን እዘን ሃገራት እዚኣተን ክተዓናቐፋ ይፍትና እየን ኣብቲ መንገድታት ግን ኣብ ኩናት ክንኣቱ የብልና ዝብል ስምምዕ ገይሮም እዮም ትማሊ እዚ ትማሊ ከማን ዢ ከይዱ ነይሩ ንኣሜሪካ እዚ ማይክሮቺፕስ ንምሙሉእ ዓለም ኣብ ሓደጋ ከይእትዎ ዝፍራሕ ደሎ ምክንያቱ መን ተቆፃፀሮ እዩ ደሎ ሕጂ ትባእሲ ኦልሬዲ ጃፓን እዛ ቻይና በአሜሪካ ሙሉ ሪላይ ትገብር ዝነበረት ነቲ ናታ ቀዲሓ ከመይ ከም ዝስራሕ ጽቡቅ ጌራ ሰኒዓ ሓሊፋታ ኸይዳ ሕጂ ዝቁርብ መዓልታት ሚሳይል ሱፐር ሶኒክ ዝበሃል ሚሳይል ቻይና ሰሪሓ ሓሊፋትና ኸይዳ ቻይና በክንደይ ዓመታት ሓሊፋትና ኸይዳ ፍጹም ከነርክባ ይንኽእል ኢና ኢሎም ናይ ፔንታጎን ከይተረፈ እዩ ተኣሚኑ ዝቁርብ ገለ ግዝያት ይቆም ኢሉ እዚ ደፍራሕ ምስ ዘሎ ንሳቶም
I mean, it used to be, but there's something else happening with the supply chain that might be hard to see in this diagram, which is that the US is still the kingpin of this system. They're the most important player. They have the most important ingredients, the best designs, the best software, and the most machines to make chips. Taiwan, their bestie, has the second most important ingredients in all of this, the fabs that actually make the chips. China, on the other hand, is in a position of weakness. Their role is basically the big hungry chip consumer, totally reliant on their frenemy, the United States, and their annoying neighbor, Taiwan, who they want to invade, but now they're reliant on for cutting-edge chips. And what's at stake here for China? Well, it's not just their economy. They don't want chips just so they can have a bunch of cool tech. They want it because more and more, they need advanced chips for their military.
ቻይና ነቲ ቺፕስ ንሚሊታሪ ኣየድልያ እዩ እዚ ኩሉም ሮኬታት ዝትኮስ ብምልኡ ብቺፕስ ከም ዝስራሕ ዝፈልጥዎ ክትቅለኩም ሕጂ እገዳ ምስ ገበረት ለኣሜሪካ ካት ኦፍ ምስ ገበረታ ናታ ፕሮዲስ ክትገብር ጀሚራ ሕጂ ሓዲፋታ ኸይዳ እያ ሕጂ ክትሪእዎ ኢኹም ናብኡ ክመፅእ እዩ ንሱ
So it's like the 2010s, China's military is getting kind of scary, but it's not that scary, says the US. We're not that worried. We'll always be ahead of China when it comes to controlling the supply chain, and our military gets first dibs on all the best chips. China has no chance of catching up ever. And this is true. China was truly behind. They did not have the tech and the designs and the companies and the ability to make advanced chips.
Look, እዚ ናይ ኣሜሪካውያን ኣተሓሳስባ ቻይና በቃ ይትገድፈናንያ ኣይተርክበናንያ ኣብቲ በፅሑ የብላን እቲ ቺፕስ ንሕና ኢና ንገብሮ ዝብል ትዕቢት እዩ ነይሩ ከመይ ጌራ ከም ዝቀደመቶም ርእሶም ጭሩሩ ስጋብ ዝብሎም ከም ዝኾነን ክትሪእዎ እዮም ሕጂ
We're reliant on the United States. If China pissed off the US, they could just take away their chips. And now we have a rising conflict on our hands. China, this big superpower, is not going to let this happen. They realize that they have to do two things. Number one, they have to start making their own chips. They want to break free and stop relying on the US for anything, make their own chips so that the US doesn't have leverage over them. And number two, and deeply related, is they want to continue to build up their military, to modernize it, to build more warships and satellites and high-tech missiles and drones, and eventually AI. All of this needs advanced chips, which they don't have. So they're like, we are going to make them on their own. And the US is like, good luck, China. You're so far behind. Good luck trying to figure out how to do this thing that we've spent the past 60 years figuring out how to do, make really expensive chips. Experts in software and machinery and fabs, like, you have no chance. So how is China going to catch up? Lucky for them, in China, There's a blurry line between businesses and the military. It's all kind of overseen by the state. And also lucky for them, there are loads of US tech companies that are addicted to making money by selling microchip technology to China. So instead of invent it themselves, they see an opportunity here. Need software and equipment for your new chip industry? Get it from the US. Need fancy chip designs and software? US companies have you covered. Need those high-tech chips produced for your military projects? American companies will sell them to you. And yes, TSMC in Taiwan will make them for you. Wait, China's using US technology to get ahead of US technology? What? In 2021, the Washington Post reported that China was building super advanced laboratories to test scary new weapons, including nukes. And guess what? They were using American semiconductor tech to do this. It started to become clear that
لك عب كلتشن إسرائيل حدن أمريكاوين كقبلوا زي كقالوا فلايتهم بينتاغون زعلوا تحلفتي حدا كأمنوا زي كقالوا تشانا أبزي كيراس قازي بثناثنا سيمي كوندكتر يمزبلون نساتهم جيرا تشاينا أتي سوبرسونيك زبهال ميسايل سريحة هتحلفنا يتقلني هذا بوار نورو حليفاتهم كده.
American companies were selling tech and chips and software to Chinese tech companies that were actually just a front for the military. Wow. Yikes. The US chip industry is now allowing China to get ahead. This was starting to happen, but I think what really woke up the US is when this happened.
Huge step forward in China's military.
China conducted 2 tests of a hypersonic missile system.
Technology that would allow it to fire a nuclear warhead faster than anyone else.
The US does not currently have the ability to even track this weapon, much less defeat it.
بقى أمريكا زقوني يكون عقمية بلنان نزينا تشاينا سرحتو ميسايل كتركبو حجيلو حج السوق زارو صنها أمريكاوي زغزارب صنها بناتنا بنا أمريكا خمس كيلو قال زبل صنها تشاينا صبو غيرهم يم حليفهم كيدهم صبو غيرهم ميميك غيرهم حليفهم صبو غيرهم كم سرح فليتهم يم.
US military generals wake up one morning to discover that China has just tested a new weapon, a missile that flew around the entire world, going 5 times the speed of sound, a mile a second. Oh, and it's really hard to see because it flies below radar range. It's super nimble, maneuverable, and has the ability to carry nukes. The US had been working on something similar, but China beat them to it by years. And it was American microchip technology that helped them build it. Oh, shit. Yikes. This totally caught them off guard.
Says that US intelligence services had no idea that China was so far ahead.
So it turns out that while the US government thought that they were running faster and that they were fine, they were actually fueling the rise of their biggest rival by giving them the technology that they need to get ahead. So the US decides that they've got to do something. China is ahead on these missiles, and they might get ahead on things like AI, and they're doing it with our tech. No more free trade, no more free markets. The government is jumping back into the chip game to sort this out.
Fundamental change is taking place today, politically, economically.
لك تشاينا حليفاتهم كتكيد مس جمرت تاغيرو سانكشن كغبروا لا جمري ام تشاينا تري والله لزيتي كل غزي تشجر ناي بولي ناي معرباوين حجي ليهم تشاينا حليفاتهم مسكدت ناب سانكشن ناب كال انكتوا ازيتي شجر زغون زلو بزعلم.
And technologically.
All right, Joe Biden's like rolling up his sleeves. He's like, what do we do here? Step 1, cut them off. No more chips for China.
The Biden administration published a large set of export controls on Friday in order to slow Beijing's technological and military advances.
The restrictions will limit Chinese companies' access to advanced computer chips.
And here we are back in the fun bureaucratic paperwork. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security, docket number 22093.
بقى تشاينا زخونه يكون chips كاب أمريكا كتجزء يبلان ويك أتي سيمي كوندكتر كريو صنعه فتوم كتجزء يبلان كبانا كبلو كتعنا أفوا مهنا تخد حلفنا يبلان بحالتي أمسهم. that's why تي ايروني بزعالم زنريو زلنا. حجينا أنا أفريقيا عند حرمتي خا معبلا دليو خاني مدحر حافل كا حتى هاجر معبلا كنا ترايم وجلنا زي تشجرنا هوين زلو سب كردالنا زي كل زلو
0-0204 RIN 0674. Certain advanced computing and semiconductor manufacturing items, supercomputers, and semiconductor end use entity list modification. I'm not going to go through this. This is just a bunch of rules that says no more chips to China. All those cutting-edge chips that China was buying from U.S. companies, blocked.
The restrictions will limit Chinese companies' access to advanced computer chips.
Manufacturing equipment they need to make their own chips, blocked. All that U.S.-made vital software that Chinese companies need to design their own chips, block, block, block.
We will bring these jobs back to our shores and end our dependence on foreign chips.
In fact, the Biden administration went super far to say that any company globally that uses U.S. tech to produce chips is now blocked from doing business with Chinese firms.
በቃ እጅታ አሜሪካ ላይ ብልሐግ ውጽያ ዝኾነ ትኹን ካምፓኒ ኣብ ልክ ወላ ካብ ዓድና ወጻኢ ትኹን ፎሬን ትኹን ንኣብነት በዓል ኔዘርላንድን ጃፓንን ገለን ምሳና ርክብ ዘለዋ ተኮይናታ ሃገር እቲኣ ዝኾነ ይኹን ናይ ቻይና ነገር ከይትሸይጥን ከይትገዝእን ከይትህባን ዝብል ሕግ ውጽያ እዚ እቲ ቡሊ ዝበሃል ናይ ዓለም
China off from certain semiconductor chips made anywhere in the world with U.S. equipment.
Why stop there? Americans are now forbidden from working for Chinese chip companies. This is huge news. This is huge news. This is happening. This is we're in the middle of this right now. But let's go back to that visual of the whole supply chain. If you cut off this, then yeah, you hurt China, but you also hurt the other side of this line, U.S. chip makers. One example, this US chip maker, NVIDIA. They went from selling tons of chips to China to suddenly being banned from doing so. This has led to a $400 million loss in revenue in just 1 quarter. Poof, up in smoke. One of the biggest chip makers now totally cut off from their big customer because Joe Biden is afraid of the Chinese military, and for good reason, which leads to step 2 of this policy. The Biden administration wasn't going to leave these tech companies out dry, so they gave billions of dollars to American chip makers to say, hey, yeah, sorry we cut you off from your main customer because we're kind of getting scared of their military, but we have to protect our chips. Here's a bunch of money. Congress passed the CHIPS Act, which gives billions of dollars to these companies to create fabs back in the United States.
This time it wasn't Russia, but China, another rival power, would get way ahead of us if we didn't pull out all the stops. And this legislation is the first large step in pulling out all of those stops.
The government wants the fabs to come home to ensure that this most valuable technology isn't solely reliant on outside countries. And we're talking giant payouts. 50 billion taxpayer dollars go to companies like Intel, which is now opening a new fab in Ohio.
We are going to build the most advanced stuff in the world right here in Ohio.
Or even TSMC themselves, which is based in Taiwan, but is now opening a new fab in Arizona. Keep it in the family. Okay, so this is economic war, and the Biden administration just did a huge move. Reminder that the reason why this is important is because it's not just about business or even missiles. This is about chips. Chips are not just chips. Chips are the future. Chips are power. Yes, chips mean economic growth and new cool technology, but chips also mean new weapons. Chips are the currency of geopolitical power. Kind of like what oil used to be, but now it's freaking silicon with a bunch of on and off switches on it. The US is taking control of its valuable resource and cutting China off. So the US makes this big move, cuts China off, and that, this is geopolitical conflict. They just made the move. The ball's in China's court now. How will they respond? And this is where Taiwan comes back into the picture. Taiwan, this small country that finds itself in the crossfires of this conflict. 92% of all advanced chips are made here, mostly by TSMC. The US is totally reliant on them. A few months before the Biden administration was doing all of this, making it illegal to sell chips to China, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Not just to shake hands with political leaders, no. She was there to visit TSMC, the chip fab. What Pelosi was really doing here was signaling to Taiwan that they are vital to American security. The US relies on this, and will protect it.
Came to Taiwan to make unequivocally clear we will not abandon our commitment to Taiwan, and we are proud of our enduring friendship.
And in doing so, she shows us what China's counter move might be in all of this. It might be Taiwan.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes, that's the commitment we made.
Okay, but wait, what this doesn't mean is China's going to invade Taiwan and take all the chips or take over the fab or something. That scenario doesn't make any sense.
No, America በንጻሩ እንታይ ኢሎም እንተዳ ቻይና ንታይዋን ወሪራታ ነቲ ናይ ሰሚኮንዳክተር ኣብ ታይዋን ደሎ ብሙሉእ ብሚሳይል ጌርና ክንዕኑ ወይና ኢሎም እዮም ከም ስርዓትኩም ኢሎም እዮም ናይ ሎማ ዓመት ድዩ ዝቀረባ ግዜ ከምኡ ብዙሕ ግዜ ኣብ ኒውስ ወፂ ታይዋን ርእሶም ሰንቢዶም እዮም بقى كنعنوينا مريت حموشتي كنقبرو إنا معناتو أب إيد تشاينا اللي حروديو نحنا ون ناب مريت كنأتو إنا مساكم ناب قد إلهم أجهدهمكم إلهم يمسو.
If China invaded Taiwan, all they would find is a bunch of empty fabs if they weren't bombed already. They wouldn't know how to operate them. They wouldn't have all of the engineers and the software and all of the supply chain stuff that they would need to actually make chips. They would likely be fighting a war, and the US would probably get involved. I made a whole video about it. You can go check it out. Anyway, the effective countermove here for China would be to operate right on the edge of active warfare, to strike back at the US without provoking a military response. This is how big nuclear powers do it. They don't actually clash. They want to just sort of poke at each other. One scenario would be China sending a bunch of its Navy ships to set up in the ocean right around here, creating a kind of partial blockade. They could stop cargo ships that are coming to and from the island, kind of just slowing everything down, but really holding the silicon hostage, making it hard for the supply chain to actually work. I mean, just remember like the COVID-19 chip shortage or like supply chain shortage or even like the Suez Canal blockage from a couple years ago. Imagine those supply chain issues, but like on steroids, totally debilitating and being used for a hostile purpose to strike back at the US. Like Biden forbidding American companies to sell chips to China, the blockade would be a way to strike at your nuclear armed rival without going too far, without risking too much escalation or a miscalculation.
It's incumbent upon us to stay number one.
To lead the world in future industries and protect our national security.
We are going to build the most advanced stuff in the world.
That's where we're at. We're in the middle of another economic war between big nuclear powers. We don't know what happens next, but one thing that feels clear to me is that Cold War vibes are back as these two great powers with different ideologies about the world compete with each other. This fight over chips will continue. And this idea in international relations that I kind of took for granted, which is that like globalization and interdependence is good and will lead to less conflict, it's being seriously challenged. Economic interdependence is being used as a weapon. That's what we're seeing here. And not just here. I made a video a couple months ago about how Vladimir Putin is cutting off natural gas to Europe. Frankly, it's not that much different than Joe Biden cutting off microchips to China. I mean, it is different in a lot of ways, blah, 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 we get it. But like...
China لو ما أنت زوج حدش ريبورت نيرو أنت إدبل Chinese semiconductors company SMIC came under US sanctions all the way back in 2005. Then it was entirely blacklisted by US in 2020. A blacklist American despite constant attacks. SMIC has made 7nm እቶም ሳይ ፎሎ ክትብሉ ንጽንሐኩም ተረዲእኩም ኣሎ ሕጂ ቫይረስ 14nm እንደዳ ኮይኑ እዚ 7nm ዝበሃል ቺፕ ዕጽፍናቱ ዝነኣሸት ማለት እዩ ብማይክሮሶፍት ጥራይኻ ክትሪኦ ትኽእል ናይ ላቦራቶሪ ማይክሮስኮፕ ጥራይኻ ክትሪኦ ትኽእል እቲ ሰሪሖሞ ዘለዉ ቻይና እዚ ሕጂ ንቻይና ወይ ኣሄድ ከም ትኸይድ ኣብቲ ናይ ሰሚ ኮንዳክተር ዝግበር ዘሎ ኩናት ኢና ንርኢ ዘለና ማለት እዩ እዚ ሕጂ ቀሊልኩም ከይትሪእዎ እቲ ቀደም ኩናት ናይ እንታይ ኻትብሎ ዝነበረ ናብ ከምዚ እዩ ተቐይር ዘሎ ናብ ሰሚ ኮንዳክተርስ እዩ ተቐይር ዘሎ እቲ ኩናት ብርቱዕ ኩናት ክመጽእ ይኽእል እዩ በየን ክሕዝዎ ይኽእሉ ንሕና ኣድቫንቴጅ ንወስደሉ ናባና እንድሕር ዳ መጺና ንሕና እቲ ዞባ ዘለና ሎኬሽን ኣድቫንቴጅ ክንወስደሉ ንኽእል ኢና ከምዚ እንድሕር ዳ ካምፓኒታት ኣብኡ ዓዲምና ናይ ቻይና ናይ ገለን እንድሕር ዳ ኣብኡ መጺአን ክሰርሓ ጀሚረን ንትራንስፖርት ምሙሉእ እቲ ዞባና ክቆጻጽሮ ስለዝጥዕመን ስለዝሓጽረለን ትሩት ካምፓኒታት ክንዕድም ንኽእል ኢና ሰሚ ኮንዳክተር ዝሰርሓ ካምፓኒታት አይቲ ዝተምሃሩ ደቂ ዓዲ እንተደኣ ተዓዲሞም ክሰርሑ ይኽእሉ ትካላት ናይ ቻይና ንኣብነት እዚአን እንተን ሰሚ ኮንዳክተር ዝሰርሓ ድበሃላ ዓበይቲ ዝበሃላት ናይ ቻይና ትካላት እዚኣተን እየን ሓንቲ ኸ እዚኣ ንህለት ተሰራርሖም ከምዚ ዓይነት ተሰራርሖ እዮም ዘለዎም ምሁር ዓቕሚ ሰብ የድሊ ኦፍ ኮርስ ግን እቲ ዝዓበየቲ ጋቨርንመንት ፖሊሲ ከቲ ጋቨርንመንት ይቕበሎ ዶ እዩ እምበር እቶም ቻይና ኣትዮም as long as እቲ ሎኬሽን ዘለካ ናይ ትራንስፖርሽን ተጠቒሞም ነቲ ዞባና ኤርትራ ናብ ዝለዓለ ጥርዙ ከብፅሕዎ ይኽእሉ እዮም ሕጂ ንሕና ናብ ረብሓና ንቕይረሉ ግዜ ወይ ከዓ እቶም ሰብ ቢዝነስ ሰብ ማል ዘለኹም እዚ ቢዝነስ ኣዝዩ ኣገዳሲ ዝበሃል ካብቲ ዝዓበየ ፓርት ክፅወት ዝኽእል ኣብ ኤርትራ ምዃኑ ፍለጡ ናይ ፊቸር ከዓ ከም ዘለዎ ፍለጡ እቲ ሰሚ ኮንዳክተር ዝበሃል doesn't matter ክንደይ ገንዘብ ኣለካ ወይ ናው ተሰሪሕካ ገንዘብ ተሊካ ተውፍር ትኽእል ኢኻ ሼር ክትኣቱ ትኽእል ምስኣቶም ምዞም ትካላት ናብ ዓድኻ መፅኦም ንሕሰሪሖም ሙሉ ኣፍሪካ ክትቆፃፀሩ ትኽእል ኢኻ ባዕልኻ ሕጂ ቢዝነስ እውን ክትከፍተሉ ትኽእል ኢኻ ከም ኣይድያ እየ ተምፃልኩም ዘለኹ ምሳይ ዝፀናሕኩም ኣዝየ ደመስግነኩም ሼር ላይክ ብምግባር ከዓ ኣይትረስዑ ተንኪዩ ደቂየረይ
ዘይከውኒ